okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, Zach, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. This is From the Cowboy State Podcast. I'm your host, Michaela Getz, and this is Season 2, Episode 1. We've got Zach Buchel. Correct?
Buchel.
Oh, see, I should have asked you. I am so sorry. My gosh.
It's like a first day of school thing. Everybody always pronounces it that way. Like the teachers would always pronounce it Buchel and think I'm French. But
see, and
it's actually Lithuanian.
Oh, well, there we go. We're learning something new already off the bat here.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So we're going to be talking about you said quarter of an acre, third of an acre.
Third of an acre right now.
Okay, right now. Mm-hmm. Gardening operation. And let's just start from the very get-go. How did you even get into this?
Yes, that's a long story.
Okay.
So, I'm from Chicago originally. So I grew up in the suburbs, like an hour and a half outside of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And went to college for business, and all my friends in college were doing that, going to school for business, ended up working corporate kind of jobs, like, sales stuff for Target or something like that. That's kind of what everybody in my social sphere in college was going into. And my senior year, you kind of have that experience of like, what the hell am I going to do with my life?
Yeah.
I've almost everybody's gone through that. And I just knew that I didn't want to do that, like what everybody else was doing.
Right.
Go down the corporate 9-to-5 path. It's just not for me. And nothing against people that do that.
Sure.
But I was really interested in doing something that actually had an impact on the world. So I ended up working at a soup kitchen my first year out of college in Chicago.
Okay.
And so I lived in Chicago out of college. And I never had lived in Chicago before then. So the suburbs and the actual city is like Mars versus Earth.
Yes.
Pretty much the complete opposite. And all of my friends grew up in the suburbs, and they're still to this day not very well versed in like what it's like to live in Chicago.
Yeah.
But that was one of my favorite years of my life so far, because I worked at a soup kitchen, and our job was basically just serving food to the homeless. And that wasn't really why I loved it. I loved it just by interacting with the guys, because it was really homeless people are just really fun to interact with, because they're the most street smart people on earth, especially in Chicago. And the guys I was working with were just a lot of fun. But during that year, I went to visit a couple urban farms in Chicago. And I was interested in vegetable farming actually a little bit in college. I took a class called, what was it called? It was something about local food in college, and it got me real jazzed up about it. Okay. And I had never really gardened much growing up. Growing up in my culture, farming wasn't a big deal. Like not like around here in Powell. Like it's not a farm community where I grew up. It was suburbia. Mm-hmm. And so, I wasn't really around agriculture at all. My dad grew up in the city of Chicago. My mom grew up in Iowa, but also suburbia Iowa wasn't really like farming.
Okay.
So I became really interested in that while I was living in Chicago and a little bit before. And I visited some urban farms on the south side. And the south side is a very rough area. I mean, if you know anything about Chicago, that's where all the murders happen.
Yes.
That's where all the rough stuff happens, the south and the west side. So I visited a couple urban farms that were just hugely inspirational because they were growing food on parking lots.
Okay.
So there's not a lot of land in the city, like open land where there's grass and stuff. But there's a lot of parking lots, especially on the south side. There's a lot of abandoned stuff. So they were making compost out of restaurant waste, which is really cool because there's truckloads of restaurants and truckloads of garbage that if you know how to separate it all, you can make compost out of it. And they were making compost in huge quantities and making just 2 feet deep basically raised beds, but just on top of pavement.
Okay.
So they were growing vegetables in pavement. And the really inspiring part of it was it's in the south side, so it's a rough neighborhood. And the guys working the farm were basically kids that grew up there that would have been dealing drugs otherwise.
Sure.
Because there's nothing else going on down there. It's what you call a food desert. Are you familiar with that term?
Yes. We have food deserts here in Wyoming.
Totally.
Yeah, just night and day, different type of food desert.
Yeah, totally. There's some weird parallels, actually. Yes. In terms of a food desert. But yeah, there's basically, the only food down there is like liquor stores and convenience stores and crap.
Right.
So that was just really inspiring to see a business that was actually doing something positive for the community. So that really made a big impact on me. And then, so I was living in Chicago for another year after that. I worked at a food pantry after that. I visited a few more farms my second year. But I'm not really a city person. I can't really live in a city forever. So I was starting to feel kind of claustrophobic and wanted to get out and do something else. And I wanted to work in local food agriculture somewhere else. And originally my plan was to work in California, because I know there's a whole bunch of that going on there. I mean, it's still kind of cutting edge in a lot of ways in the farm to table space. I'd say like the Bay Area, there's just so much interest in this.
Right.
So I was applying for jobs and stuff. And in the meantime, my mom, my family was slowly but surely moving out here to the Bighorn Basin. My dad's had a house out here for 20 years now. He has a business here, and my family was slowly but surely moving out here full time. And so my mom moved out here and saw a PBS documentary about Scott Richard with Shoshone River Farm. Are you familiar with him?
Yes, Scott is phenomenal.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. Yeah. He's a good friend of mine now. But so I saw that PBS documentary while I was still in Chicago, and my mom's like, this is right across the street from her house.
Okay.
And so you should talk to him and see if you could work for him. And I did, and ended up working there.
Oh,
and
great.
More or less the rest is history. I came out here, worked for him, and it was just heaven. Like day one. I remember, I have a vivid memory of like the first day or two I was working there. And Scott, for those of you that don't know, has a 3-acre vegetable farm just outside of Cody. And he's doing actually kind of similar setup to the guys in Chicago. I mean, he's making his own compost. He's putting like a 2-foot layer of it throughout, but it's over 3 acres. Now that's a lot of land. And for vegetables, that's a lot of land.
Really, is there anything Scott does not grow? I took a tour when I first moved here, and he walked me through his greenhouses, and I'm not sure if there's anything that he touches that doesn't grow.
There's not much.
Really?
He does incredible stuff.
He does.
I'm still blown away. I mean, growing turmeric, I think he has... Actually, I don't know if he's ever grown turmeric, but he grows ginger here.
He does.
That's ridiculously hard. And I was amazed back then, knowing what I know now, because I have been growing my own stuff for 4 years now. It's incredibly remarkable what he's doing.
Yeah.
Because I know how hard it is now, because I've been doing it. But his operation is just incredible. But I remember the first week I was working there, some of the other employees were talking about like how there was robots in the rain coming down, and there's all these nanobots going on and stuff. And I was like, this is the right place for me.
Right.
It was a really chaotic, it's organized, but it was just a chaotic, fun environment. Okay. And I thrive in that. I love chaotic, non-structural environments.
Okay.
This was like that. It was just super fast-paced. And then while I was working there, I only actually worked on the farm for like 3 months. Okay. But it was just so much fun. It was my favorite job I've ever had. Yeah. It was such a short job, but it was so much fun. My dream life would just be to be an employee of somebody like Scott's and have a really stable living and all that. I would be in heaven. I love doing just the harvesting and the actual grunt work of working on a farm like that. It's just paradise for me. Okay. But he had to leave town for a month.
Scott did?
Yeah, okay. during it was like the second month I was working there. He had to leave town, which is he's never done that since. he's working all the time, March through November, like every single day, pretty much not taking a day off. And he had to leave town for a family issue for a month, and he put me in charge of running the farm, which was insane. I still can't believe to this day that he did that. He's going to kill me for telling the story. But it is an important part of the story, I think.
Scott, if you're listening, just plug your ears now.
Yeah. But yeah, I did the whole markets for him and everything for a month, and it was he was doing like 3 or 4 farmers markets a week at the time, and it was during September, which is pretty much the second most important month of the year for a farm like that. Sure. It's when all the stuff is harvested. So it was intense, and there was I can't even remember how many people were working. It was 2 or 3 of us, and they all have more experience than me in terms of actually harvesting the stuff. But it was still a blast, but it was very stressful. We were driving his truck to markets in Cody and Red Lodge. I can't even remember what exactly he was doing, but we had to talk to him every day. We had this little phone conversation meeting every day. What was going to get harvested and stuff. Yeah, it was really funny looking back at it. And my mom came over to help and stuff. In fact, he just recently, my buddy was working there and brought this story up to him. He's like, yeah, I heard Zach ran the farm for you for a month. And he's like, yeah, his mother helps though. And I thought that was so funny. Funny. So yeah, my mom helped, his dad helped and everything. But yeah, it was sort of like a prequel to running my own farm, right? In a lot of ways. But I didn't end up running my own farm for a couple of years after that. But,
sure. Now, did you stay over there at Shoshone River?
No. Okay. No, I was living with my family out here.
No. I'm sorry. Did you stay employed over there for that time?
Just for that couple months. Okay. It was because once winter hit, there's really not much to do.
Sure. Okay.
And I sort of worked there a little bit the next year, but actually ended up having a facial injury. I was riding my bike over there, and I did a face plant on the way over there.
That'll do it.
Scraped my nose, I broke my nose and all sorts of stuff, and just ended up working there again. But the reason for that actually was because I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Yeah. So when I was working there, I wanted to do a business sort of related to this. Okay. And so I was looking at how his farm operated, and to me, one of the biggest bottlenecks, and to this day, it still is a big bottleneck, is the markets and actually accessing customers. Yep. It's still a big problem.
Well, and I feel like there's so many different customers you can have, too, depending on your business. Yes. Do you want to sell to restaurants? Yes. Do you want to sell directly to the consumer? What do you... Yeah.
We could go really deep into that. That's a big topic. Yeah. So my original idea was to start a website, farmtablewest.com, which still exists, by the way, where you can order all of the vegetables. And I was going to try and bring in meat, eggs, everything. So I started talking to all sorts of farmers. My idea was to have an online farmers market, because the farmers market itself was just... There's so much risk involved going to farmers markets when you bring like $2,000 worth of stuff and you only sell $1,000, and it's a perishable product. The value goes down, and it's not just the value; it's like the weightlifting of moving the stuff back and forth. It was so hard, and part of the reason for that situation is just because we're in the Bighorn Basin. There's only 26,000 people here, so there's not a lot of customers. And that's why he was doing so many different markets and stuff. So I thought that, my original idea was going to solve that problem. Sure. Having an online farmers market. Because there were some examples of that throughout the country. Right. There's actually was a couple in San Francisco area that were really killing it. But it's like literally Mars compared to here, Sure. Way more people interested in it there. So I started that and was working with him and about 5-10 other farms to try and sell their stuff, and we were the main thing I was trying to do was get us into Yellowstone. There's a big concessionaire of food in Yellowstone. Xanterra is the company. Okay. And we were trying to sell vegetables to them to put in their kitchens throughout the the park.
Okay.
Because it's a huge market. And we actually did get in there and we were selling a little bit of stuff, but the challenge was the peak of demand for them is like June, July. Mm-hmm. And the crops don't really start exploding until August, September. So it was really challenging to make the supply demand thing work. And,
sure.
So I ended up stopping that and growing my own stuff in 2020 because the business of reselling other people's stuff and actually making money is really hard with local stuff. Unless you live in a place like Chicago where you have millions of people and hopefully millions of products to sell. You need high volume, high supply and demand to make that work. So I just kind of realized that was a delusional business idea. And my real passion is growing anyway. So I'm obsessed with growing. I was obsessed that whole period of reselling other people's stuff. Okay. And so I took in 2020, my business actually did explode. This was still before I was really farming, because food shortage was a big topic back then. You know, 4 years ago, everybody was freaking out. Food shelves were empty, all that kind of stuff. And even my little online website in Cody, Wyoming was exploding. I was getting like 30, 40 orders a week.
Wow.
And I was reselling other farm stuff and buying organic produce to sell. Okay. And so I kind of looked at that and I was like, there's clearly there's still a huge demand for produce. And so I started the journey of growing my own, because my parents have 11 acres and there's a huge horse pasture that's just sitting there. Nothing's growing on it. Okay. And my dad wants agriculture to happen there, and he's a city person. He's not really a farmer. So we've always had another person run the hay on that property. So I started growing, and then I took a farm course online to really learn, because I didn't have 10 years of experience. Like Scott, when he started, he had been growing his entire life, so he had a lot of experience. Sure. And it takes a lot of experience to be good at growing crops. So I took a course from Neversink Farm, which is a really big farm. Well, it's not a big farm, but it's the reputation of that farm in local agriculture is really big. If you go on YouTube, his YouTube channel is like, I don't know, 150, 200,000 subscribers. Wow. And he is growing on 1.5 acres in upstate New York, which is a very similar climate to here. It's in the mountains, so it's almost as cold as here. Just gets way more snow. There's some differences, but it's one of the most similar climates I've ever seen on the internet, because a lot of people talking about growing are in way warmer climates. And he grows and harvests year round. And so 12 months a year, he's harvesting and selling at a market. And so I took his farm course, and it's the best investment I've ever made in my life. It cost about the same as one of my college courses. Oh, and sure. I think it was like 20, 40 hours of information. And I've probably spent 100 hours just watching those videos again and again, just to learn. And that's shaved tons of years off my learning curve. And I still have years to go. A lot of years to go still. But that helped a lot in terms of just setting up the infrastructure of my farm. And my farm is only 4 years old now. So that was about 4 years ago when I took that course and started the whole process of getting a loan FSA loan to fund a large portion of the initial big capital investments, like getting a well drilled, a building, greenhouse, all that fun stuff. But that farm course helped me spend the money wisely. So I think that farm course cost me $2,000 or something, and it saved probably 20, because I think that's a big problem with people trying to start farms, is not knowing where to spend their capital efficiently to really save them years of blood, sweat, and tears. But anyway, that's kind of the journey of where I am today. So in the short version of it. Fair enough. So yeah, the Neversink Farm course has helped immensely. And this is the first year in the 4 years of growing my own stuff that we've actually made a profit.
Okay.
First 3 years is mostly just putting in infrastructure like a well, greenhouse building. We have 4 greenhouses now, and we're going to have probably another 3 more high tunnels over the next couple of years. But yeah, that's the short version.
that was the short one. No, fair enough. But that answered a lot of questions. And you said this was the first year, that you had made a profit. And I saw on your Facebook, on the Farmtablewest Facebook page, that you had said you grew $80,000 worth of food on your acreage.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about that, because you said your first few years you were getting your greenhouses established, and you have greenhouses and the high tunnels. You do both?
Well, yeah.
I guess, so let's back up a little bit more, because are you using those terms synonymously?
I am. I'm really bad.
Okay. No, that's okay.
I'm not a technical person at all. I'm real general.
Let's just throw it out there.
Yeah. So what's your definition of a greenhouse, actually?
So to me, a greenhouse is truly when you walk out and you see your greenhouse structure. That's the
like
greenhouse.
Glass?
It doesn't have to be glass. It can be not the tarp. What's that? Plastic. Yes.
Yeah, not the hard plastic. You're talking about just kind of like
and
Scott's.
you can use the tempered glass or what have you. But yes, to me, it's that structured element.
Right.
Is the traditional.
That's a greenhouse.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a loaded topic right there. Because there is a lot of terms out there, right?
Yes.
I don't know. So I think the technical term for what I have is I have 2 high tunnels, like Scott's, because you've been to Scott's Farm. Mm-hmm. So they're all mostly steel and a little bit of wood. I'm going to pretty much do all steel from now on because I don't like wood. Okay. And then I have 2 what are called caterpillar tunnels. And those are a much cheaper option of what I use greenhouse pretty synonymously for all this stuff, because it's all the same concept as using plastic or glass or polycarbonate to warm up an environment with the sun, basically. So yeah, I've dabbled with a lot of different versions of that. I've dabbled with low tunnels, all sorts of stuff. But so I've got 2 caterpillar tunnels and 2 high tunnels right now. I think is the correct terminology, whatever. And I'm sorry, what was your original question again?
Honestly. So I was just asking, I guess, so you said originally, I think honestly I ended up with about 3 different questions. Yeah. I was asking about your first few years. You said it was just kind of about getting started. Right. And now your 4th year here, 2024, this past year, because we're in December now, you have grown $80,000 worth of crop. Yes. Okay. Right. So the first 3 years were rough. And this year was actually still really rough. Sure. Building a farm, and Scott will tell you this, is it's no small undertaking. You gotta do some work. And so the first couple of years, let's see, like I went through the process of getting an FSA loan. Their office is right over here too, isn't it? That's through USDA? Yeah, USDA. No, I'm sorry, their office is in Powell, but over there. Yeah, not here. And they do a lot of loans for farms all around here. And I think I was the first one around here that was like a market farm, because most of the loans that they do is for big 500,000 acre farms in Powell and stuff. And I got a micro loan from them, $50,000 to fund stuff like putting in a well, building, wash pack building and stuff, because to do a vegetable farm, you need water. And I opted for a well because we have irrigation water on our property, but irrigation is really tricky to use for this kind of farming because you only get access to it every week or 2. Sure. And for vegetables, you need access to water like on the spot all the time. It's not really like, because a lot of crops around here, you get water. Actually, I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm guessing it's no more than once a week if you're lucky for like sugar beets and stuff. I don't really know. But, flood irrigation is a much different style of irrigation. So
Vegetables are 90% water, so you have to have really good water source. So I invested a lot, and I think by the end of the day, probably put in, it's actually a lot more. It's hard to explain this, but $12,000-$13,000 on a 100-foot deep well that allows access to water year round. And that was a big thing for me because I want to be able to grow crops year round.
Right.
One of my strategies that is a little different than Scott is I'm trying to harvest fresh year round because our market is so small. It's easier to make this business work if you sell to the same customers throughout the whole 12-month period instead of just 6 months. Mm-hmm. So it's an advantage in our small market because, you know, I've already earned a pretty good amount of customers, but to keep selling to them December through May, mm-hmm. something, even if it's a trickle of what it is in the summertime, really helps the big picture of the business. So anyway, the first couple of years was just trying to grow stuff with really crappy infrastructure and building the really good infrastructure at the same time, which is really challenging. You know, it's like we put in the first high tunnel. We got an NRCS grant for that. Mm-hmm. That office is also in the FSA office, but they do these, it's a government grant to pay for high tunnel greenhouses. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a really cool program because once you build a tunnel like that, it's more or less paid for, mm-hmm. the materials at least. You still got to build it though, and that's a challenge. You know, one of those high tunnels takes over 100 hours, 120 hours to build, depending on what you're doing. So it's a lot of work, and doing it during the growing season when you're growing crops is where the real challenge is. So the first couple of years was like trying to grow some crops and build those kinds of things at the same time because you can't really do that in January. You know, right. if you got -20, you're not building. It's not. You're not doing the infrastructure stuff. So you kind of have to do it at the same time. So it's very hard. And so actually growing enough crops to make any money and build the infrastructure is really challenging. So that's why the first couple of years there wasn't really any profit. And a lot of it has to do with just my learning curve too. You know, I took that farm course, but there's still a whole bunch of lessons that you only learn by doing it.
Right.
So first couple of years, I think we were basically doing like anywhere from like close to 50,000 in sales. And, this is the first year where we actually made some real money, and I'm still selling right now. Mm-hmm. So my strategy is actually, I think my sales now are probably even bigger than they were in September because all of the other farms stop and then my demand goes up because mm-hmm. I'm the only guy left with stuff. So I have lots of fresh spinach, carrots, cilantro, about 5-10 other crops that are still fresh being harvested right now.
And can I ask, I'm sorry, I know you're in the middle of answering one of my original questions, but one of my sub-questions, who are you selling to right now? I know you'd mentioned like the farmers markets and everything, but are you selling to restaurants, schools, what have you, or? Yeah, that's a very loaded question. Sorry.
So around here, you know, a lot of farms like this around the country, like the Never Sink Farm, for example, I'm pretty sure, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm guessing the bulk of his sales are one farmer's market a week.
Okay.
And that's kind of the strategy I'm going towards long term. But it is challenging around here because there's not many markets like that. And in a bigger populated area, it's possible to go to a market and sell $5,000 to $10,000 one day. You know, with vegetables, that's possible. But it is challenging around here because there's just not enough people, but that's the bottom line. So over the years, I've dabbled in pretty much every possible market you can do around here. So we've sold to schools, farmers markets, still the number one. And it's still a problem for the same reasons it was when I first started my business. It's still risky. And I felt the pain of that probably more this year than ever. Okay. And I'll explain why in a minute. But the farmers markets are still the best because you get retail price and retail price is kind of the best way to make money with this. You know, for me to sell to restaurants or even food hubs are another one we're doing right now. We're selling to Eat Wyoming, which is out of Casper. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yep.
And I just started selling to a food hub up in Billings as well, and that's been really successful. But the logistics are rough. There's all sorts of pros and cons to every single market. And my favorite one is the farmer's market, just because you go, ideally, in a perfect world, you go and close to sell out of whatever you bring. So you bring $2,000-$3,000 worth of stuff, and you sell $2,000 to $3,000 worth of stuff, and you come back with a bunch of empty boxes. That's the ideal world.
Sure.
But the world's not ideal. So you have to have backup plans, especially when you're growing your farm like I am. I'm still very much in a growth phase. I'm not established at all. So I've done that, and I still do online through my website a little bit. That's a tiny little thing, but it's still a couple $100, $100 to $200 a week or something. And that's delivery to customers in Cody. So I deliver directly to your doorstep, or we just started doing an online pickup. So you order on my website, and then you can pick up at Legacy Butcher and Burger Company in town. That's a really exciting one. I'm hoping we could grow. I've never been able to have a really reliable pickup location. And that's a big deal, because that could eventually make it more accessible to people than the farmer's market. The other big problem with farmer's markets is the customers only have 3-4 hours a week.
Right. You've only got that set time window.
It's a big problem.
Yep.
When you're a mother with 2 kids and you work a 9 to 5, your Saturdays are kind of precious. You're busy with soccer practice, all sorts of stuff. So there's lots of issues with there's so many more people that want this stuff, but they don't have time to make it to that market, whatever.
Right.
So that's kind of an exciting thing. What you could do is you can order on the website, and then we bring it to Legacy. They keep it in their refrigerator, and then it's just a bag with the customer's order and their name on it. And they come in Friday or Saturday during their business hours, which is a huge time window as opposed to 3-4 hours. So their business hours are 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. So
that's great. That gives you after work, before evening practices for kiddos.
Yeah, it potentially solves problems, but building something like that's going to take a long time.
Sure.
But that's an exciting little thing. And then what else? Restaurants are a big thing too. I've done restaurants since we started. So I work with Trailhead in Cody, City's Table in Cody, Zapata's in Cody right now. They're a big part for moving big volumes of stuff like salad greens and herbs, stuff that has a short shelf life. They're handy for that because they can buy bigger volumes of that than you can sometimes move at farmers markets.
Yeah.
But my direction long term is I want to sell to a big market once a week. And we started this summer selling to Billings Farmers Market. I've been doing the Cody Farmers Market since I started my business, even when I was reselling other people's stuff, every Saturday, 9 to 12 or 10 to 1, depending on the winter. And that's been really good. Over the past year, I've just noticed, I've known this for a long time. There's just not enough customers here for Scott and I. It's Cody's like 10,000 people. So it's just, his farm's already pretty well established. Mine's growing, and I know that long term, my goal is to be a 300,000 a year farm on an acre and a half. Because I already know that's possible, just because the Neversink guys are already doing it. So, but in order to do that, you need to sell it.
Right.
So I know that I'm going to need some much bigger markets eventually. So what we started to do was we joined the Billings Farmers Market. Billings is a town of 160,000 or something. I don't even remember, but and that was a big risk. Sort of betting. I was pretty much betting the farm on that decision because it's on Saturdays, and it's Saturday at the same time as the Cody market. So basically, all the momentum I had over the past 5-6 years had to be shifted to that market because it's the same time. I couldn't do both.
Right.
So I made the decision to do that, and it definitely paid off.
Wow. Okay.
So there's a huge market up there. It's way 10, 20 times the amount of people. There's 3,000 to 5,000 people coming to that market every Saturday. And I was pretty much the only guy with tomatoes and salad greens, which is the two main profit centers of the farm.
I was going to say that's what I hear everybody in demand for is where are the tomatoes?
Yeah, tomatoes are everything.
Yes.
So tomatoes are the crown jewel. I have a lot of emotion tied into tomatoes. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that go into growing them, especially here. That's a whole nother side topic. But yeah, having that worked out really well, and I'm hoping long term we could build that into the direction I want to go. Yeah. And I want to hopefully sell to Cody as well. That's part of the reason why we're doing this pickup thing at Legacy, so we could still sell to the customers, because I still had a lot of people that wanted to buy from me.
Right.
And Scott and I have talked about this in depth. You know, we've talked about this a lot. I have this philosophy in general, and this is a generalization, so it's complicated. It's not a black and white thing, but the more people growing, the more the market grows. In some ways, that's true, but there is a point where I kind of reached this year where, in order to go from like $1,000 a week at a market to $3,000 a week at one market, I got to go somewhere else. That kind of jump doesn't happen overnight. Right. I kind of needed to make a change overnight because I have employees now and stuff. You know, when you have real business costs, you need to make more money. It's the end of the, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But in some ways, I think that has been true, because when I started, I know that his sales have grown a lot since I've started, and my sales that Cody Farmers Market has grown a lot since I started. And I'm not taking credit for that at all. I'm just saying that there's been a whole community of people to build that market into what it is. There's the vendors of Cody Farmers Market are extremely motivated, want to make it better. Right. Shirley, the manager, is doing a phenomenal job of promoting events twice a year to get people in. It's been 100 little decisions over the past 6 years to grow it to what it is. It's spectacular. Yep. For a town of 10,000, it's a pretty spectacular market. Right. And we started doing the winter market 2 or 3 years into me starting my business, and that's slowly grown incredibly. We used to sell at do you know where the Colonel is in town, in Cody, the bar next to Trailhead?
Yes. Okay.
That is where we started our winter market. Okay. And we used to have like 10 customers. Sure. And now we've moved to the VFW over the period of like 5-6 years. Right. I can't even remember how long it's been now. There's 100, 200 people now. It's not a joke anymore. Right. It's actually a real market, which is still incredible to me. But what I found this year, like I said, in order for me, that market's grown a lot, and I think that both Scott and I draw our own crowd. Every vendor there draws their own crowd. That's the cool thing about a farmer's market is when you bring a bunch of different products together, really good products, they're each going to draw a different set of people, and that's what makes the market grow. Yeah. So, we have phenomenally good bakers. There's Wyoming Heritage Grains. Sarah and Kelly do a phenomenal job growing grain. They draw a totally different crowd than Scott or I could. Shirley draws a different crowd. Every vendor there draws a different crowd, and it slowly grows, slowly.
That was when I moved here. I was over in Cody originally, and that was one of the first things that I was told about was the farmer's market. Yeah. So I think it's a phenomenal market to have, and to even, again, have one is great, because there are a lot of small towns that don't.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it's for as small of a town as we got, it's really something. Yeah. But yeah, like I said, I realized that for my business to go where I want to go, I need to find some more bigger markets. So that's why I decided to go to Billings this summer, and we're going to continue that for sure the next couple of years. Yeah. Just because the kind of jump that I need to make is bigger than how fast that market's going to grow. Yeah. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. No, absolutely it does.
It's hard to, it's a loaded question.
No,
markets are always, it's a dance.
They're tedious.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to it all, but that's part of business too.
Absolutely. So I want to jog back to something that you've mentioned a couple times. You are offering a class online.
Right.
Correct. Can you tell me a little bit about that? You said that you've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. You're there.
Yeah.
You're doing it.
Yeah.
So what led you to say, okay, I'm 4 years into my operation. Let's throw a class into the mix.
Oh, yeah.
And clearly you've had a lot of success with everything that you're growing. But what made you want to do a class too? Because that's just a whole other iron in the fire.
Yeah, yeah.
And not an easy one.
So farming is very difficult to make a living at.
Especially in Wyoming.
Yeah, it's just very difficult.
Yep.
I still have not made a living. Even with the increase we've made this year, still have not made a living with farming.
Okay.
There's just a lot of reinvestment that needs to happen every year to grow it to the long term where you can make $50,000 to $100,000 in personal income. You know, to really get to that level with vegetables, at least, it takes a lot of reinvestment. So I'm still on that journey. And so 2 years ago, a friend of mine approached me with the idea of a online education platform called Homestead Mentors.
Okay.
And my friend's Ashley Trudeau. She came up with the idea to have an online education platform to teach people how to homestead and grow, do dairy, meat, chicken, eggs, microgreens, and gardening. It approached me to come up with a gardening course basically to help people grow food. And so that was actually like over 2 years ago now. And so I sort of looked at my experience with that farm course and was like, yeah, there's a huge potential in here to actually make a personal income to myself. This doesn't need to be constantly reinvested in. This is a business that doesn't really have costs.
And it's going to help a lot of people as well.
And so teaching people how to grow, I just think there's a bottomless pit of opportunity there, because I've been obsessed with like YouTube gardeners for a long time, like much longer than I've been actually growing. So I've been watching a lot of YouTube content from guys like Charles Dowding, MI Gardener, Epic Gardening, all those big YouTube channels on gardening. And now that I had been farming for a little bit, and I know the difference between farming on 1.5 acres, like when I say farming, I mean growing, $800 to $1,000 worth of vegetables on a 150 by 2.5 foot bed per year. So it means really high yields in a small space, basically. And compared to like what most people think of gardening is, that's a lot more production than your typical gardening style that is currently being taught on the internet for the most part. And so that's kind of, I saw the opportunity to like teach farming style gardening to people. And that's basically what the gardening course is. So yeah, 2 years ago, oh God, I don't even know, 1.5 years ago, we sort of finished filming it. I wrote the whole course a couple winters ago, and we finished filming it, and we're still actually kind of finishing it up. There's still, it's one of those things that's never really done.
Always evolves.
I'm learning a whole lot about building a course too, and that's a whole new rabbit hole. But long story short is the whole idea there is to teach people how to grow really high yields in a small space in a cold climate. That's the other big thing is most of the YouTube guys are in a much warmer climate than here. So I've been watching their content for years, and it's so hard for me to relate.
Sure.
Like Charles Dowding, he's probably my favorite YouTube guy. And his garden is just breathtaking. I hope to make a pilgrimage there someday.
Yeah.
But he's in southern England, which is like a zone 9.
Sure.
We're a zone 4B, 5A. So it's light years difference. And he's growing like all the stuff that I have in my greenhouse in under frost blankets. He's growing outside in December and January. Like there's no problem with doing winter production.
Sure.
So that was a big thing is I want to be able to teach this to people in a similar climate. because the internet education stuff right now is just almost all in zone 7 or below,
okay.
which is light years different. I don't even know how to grow there. Like I probably could figure it out sort of faster than other people, but I still would have a lot of problems because it's not as easy as just translating the same planting methods into a different climate and stuff. But so yeah, the whole idea there is to teach people how to grow, and it's a side project / full-time project because I still do a lot of I've started doing YouTube videos really intensely this year to start building momentum and selling that course, and it's working slowly but surely, but YouTube videos teaching people my perspective on growing in our climate, and I've found so far that there's a lot of people that really want this, especially in Canada.
Okay.
Canadians can relate pretty well because the climate's very similar.
Yeah.
In fact, I think most of Canada, where people live at least, is actually warmer than Wyoming. Like the coasts are way warmer than Wyoming and are actually easier to grow.
Interesting.
So, so yeah, so that's a side business, but it's a big part of my life too. So it's like half of what I'm doing. That's that's kind of the way I'm looking at it, because this year I was able to hire really, really good employees to help take a lot of the farming off my shoulders so I could focus a lot on that and learning that, because that's a whole nother learning curve. YouTube and online education and stuff. But yeah, ultimately it's easier to bring in personal income. So that's a reason, but I'm also insanely passionate about it. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. So probably not my last question, but one more thing I really want to make sure we cover. If you had to give advice, because we've got a lot of folks who, just like we did, move from out of state. And actually, quick side note, I was raised in Illinois, not Chicago.
Oh, nice.
Dead central Illinois.
Where?
Farming country, Lake Shelbyville.
Okay. No, I've been to Decatur and Springfield.
Well, kind of right in that area, 45 minutes south of Decatur.
Okay, cool.
So, little town called Finley. Yeah.
Oh,
so,
nice.
when you said Chicago, I was like, hey.
Yeah.
But
that's a lot different than where
it's a lot different.
That's a lot more farming community.
It is.
Yeah. Did you grow up in a farming community?
I did. Okay. My dad would have been a 6th generation farmer. Grandpa was 5th. So, yep.
What did he grow?
Row crop. It was field corn and soybeans.
Nice.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
Soil and they're spectacular. Man.
Oh, it's phenomenal. Think of what you could do there.
I know. I think about that all the time.
Or maybe don't think about it.
I hope eventually I have an opportunity to do something in Illinois.
Yeah.
Like I would just love to play with that soil, because I never had a clue what I was doing back when I lived there.
Sure. Yeah, just
because the soil here is garbage. It's just concrete.
Yeah, literally. Or like we were talking about earlier, that saline for the alkali. Yes. Yeah. But no, so we've got a lot of folks who move in from out of state and they want to get started in gardening. Yeah. So if you had to give, a quick 3-5 tips on here's what I would recommend to get started, because you went through that process.
Yeah, so that's a big one. And actually part of the reason I kind of saw the opportunity immediately when Ashley brought this up was because people ask me that question all the time at the farmer's market, because there is a lot of people moving here, especially in Cody, from Washington, California, all over the place.
Yep.
Way warmer climates too, So biggest thing, this is actually pretty top of mind for me, because I make videos all the time trying to kind of spew out these kinds of points to people. And my big thing that I teach a lot in the gardening course is no-dig style of gardening, no-dig style gardening. And that's Charles Dowding's thing.
Okay.
If you want to really go down the rabbit hole, just go to his YouTube channel and start watching all his videos. He has lots of how-to videos. You could probably just copy and set up a garden just like him. I set it up. I talk about it a little differently in my course, kind of more of the planting and farming methods is what I incorporate, but the actual no-dig style is, I think he's the guy who came up with that. I don't know for sure, but he's the first. He seems to be the leading voice on that.
And no-dig is also no-till?
Yeah.
Same?
I'll explain. So I farm no till, no dig. There's a lot of terms out there about this concept. There's back to Eden. I'm not really a Nazi about any of them.
Okay.
But terms are kind of helpful to explain a rough picture of what somebody's talking about. So my farm is technically no-till.
Okay.
What that means is minimal soil disturbance. And the only tool I use to disturb soil after an initial tilling. I till the ground first time because my ground literally sounds like this when you hit it with your knuckles. Yeah. It sounds like that. It's just concrete. So I till it the first time, and some of these back to Eden or no dig people think that that's like a sin. Okay. There's some real intense mindsets out there about this, but I'm not really that crazy about it. But the idea is minimal soil disturbance. And so I till the ground one time, and then after that, you pretty much just broad fork, which is, do you know what broad fork is?
I think we're on the same page. Yeah, it's just
it's an aerating tool for aerating soil. Aerating. People aerate big scale around here with tractors and stuff, but it's just basically sticking steel in the ground. It's like a digging fork that you stand on, and then you lean back, and then the soil is lifted, and it puts air into the soil, which is really all that roots need to grow well. And the idea is that every crop that you grow, you leave the roots in the ground after it's done to slowly decompose and build soil. And so what that does is it slowly makes the life in the soil more active. So it's like a highway. Each root that you leave in the ground is like a highway for the microorganisms to feed on, and then it gives the future crops more nutrients. The future crops' roots have easier access to nutrients. Okay. And so the way we do that on the farm is not exactly no dig. It's no till. So we're only putting on like 1 inch of compost a year, and then a lot of dry amendments. And no dig. When I say that, what I mean is it's a similar concept, but you use cardboard or paper of some kind to cover a plot of ground, cover all of the weeds and whatever's growing there, and then layer 6 inches of compost in the place that you want to grow your food, and then 6 inches of wood chips in the place you want to walk or your perimeters. Okay. And that is what Charles Dowding's no-dig style is basically, and you water that in, so you saturate it with water. And around here, that's really important because big difference between like doing that in Wyoming versus England. There's no rain here. So in England, they get rain all the time. So in order for that to work really well, it needs to be very moist. So because compost and wood chips are extremely dry for the most part, like when you first put them on. And in order for the life to start, you need moisture. But the idea is you plant straight into that compost. So you put that 6 inch layer down, and your first year you can actually grow food in it. And I think that's the best way to grow a garden. Okay. I see over the years a lot of customers that are interested in gardening. They're just like, by the time July rolls around, they're depressed because their garden's a weed jungle. And that method of growing is the lowest maintenance way to grow food out there, in my opinion. Because the way I do it, there's still a lot of weeds. The no-till style, there's still quite a bit of weeds. Sure. There's a lot of weekly maintenance that's required, but when I'm doing it full time and I have employees, it's not a big deal for me. And there's a lot of tools that we use to make that task go faster. But on a small, we're talking 1/3 of an acre is, what is an acre again? Is like 52,000 square feet or something. So we're talking, roughly 15,000 square feet of growing space. Your garden does not need to be that much. Like for a personal, like family of 4, you need 200 or 300 square feet or something, right? So you don't need all the fancy tools and whiz bangs that we use on a farm. You just need weed-free space that's very fertile, that can grow food. And the no-dig stuff, the reason I don't do it on my scale is it's really hard to get huge amounts of compost. Like there's one guy I work with up in Billings that's spectacular. Agri-Organics is his name. He's got the best compost I've ever had around here, but I buy it in huge quantities, like 20 to 40 cubic yards at a time. Wow. Most people at home are not going to be needing that. They're going to need a yard or two. So the no-dig style requires a lot of compost to set up because 6 inches of compost is a lot.
Yeah.
But the idea is you only put the 6 inches down your first year. And then the second year, you only put an inch down of wood chips and compost. So that's a huge cost savings. And that's pretty much all you need to do to feed the soil every year. And so it's a really low maintenance. All you really need to do once you get that started is you're going to have to pay attention to weeds a little bit, but it's much easier to deal with than how I farm. Like I know that from personal experience. It's so much easier to pull the weeds. There's not as many, when you put the cardboard and the 6 inches of material down, it stops light from reaching almost all of those plants. Okay. The only ones that are going to survive are the really tough ones like bindweed and thistle and stuff like that. And
the fun ones.
Yeah, the really hard perennial ones that are always hard. Yeah. But it's still easier to deal with them because those plants, they get tired. The more they have to grow through 6 inches, you pull them once, then they got to use all their energy to grow through 6 inches, do it again. And the more you pull them in that context, the less likely they are going to live. And so it's much easier to kill those perennial ones than it is on my farm. And the whole point of no dig and no till, and the biggest benefit is that you're not tilling the soil every year, which brings up new weed seeds. And so your weed seeds that are already in the soil are just there. They're never going to grow again. So it stops weed pressure immensely.
That makes sense.
It's a huge benefit to that. And for the person, and I'm talking about somebody that is not a farm person at all. Like what I'm trying to target with this course is people who live in Chicago, not farm people at all. And for those people to actually successfully grow food, I think this is the best way because it's like once you get this set up, you should only need to spend like 15 minutes a week and you should be able to grow tons of food. Because basically you got this blank canvas that can grow food, that weed pressure should be almost nothing. And it gets better over time. The first year you're going to have a little bit rougher time with it pulling weeds, but they just have a much harder time surviving in that situation. And then all you're doing is putting seeds in the ground. And as soon as that first crop comes out, you can put another seed in the ground. Like it's that easy. You don't have to do any more bed prep or anything. So it's like an assembly line of food. And so the biggest tip I have is just do that, and I have a whole bunch of resources. I have a little 9-page free guide I could give people to actually set that up in your backyard where I help you with the math of figuring out how much material to buy and where to buy it. Because actually you could buy really high quality compost and wood chips at Home Depot. And that's a big deal for people because one of the big problems with setting up a no-dig garden around here is finding enough compost. That's why I don't do it on the farm. And you need to find high-quality compost because if you just use your neighbor's manure, there's a lot of herbicide risk in that.
Yes.
Scott actually has had a big problem with that. He's had herbicide residue in his own compost that's lasted, 7 years, and you basically cannot grow a huge effective yield of any kind of nightshade or legume crop. This is a problem all over the country. There's compost companies are selling compost with this herbicide in it, and it's just because it's not their fault. It's not anybody's fault. I want to be real clear about that because this is a pretty heavy topic, the herbicide residue thing. But it is a problem, though. If you want to grow a garden, you have to get a material that does not have herbicide in it, because once you have herbicide in your growing material, your chances of growing a successful crop of tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, legumes, which is green beans, peas, any of that stuff, it goes downhill. I've had herbicide damage on tomatoes from drift, I'm pretty sure is what my problem was, because people spray around here. And again, I'm not judging anybody for doing that. I understand that it's pretty much impossible to stay on top of weeds on 500 acres, but it just is what it is. It does happen, and it does actually impact my business and stuff. But the herbicide thing is a big deal with buying the right material, and you could buy OMRI certified compost at Home Depot for about $120 a yard. So you could set up a 200-300 square foot garden for, I don't know, $200 or $300 for your first year, and then your second year would be like $50 to $75. So it's not that expensive.
Sure.
And that OMRI certification on compost at a box store should guarantee that there's no herbicide in it. I don't really want to say it is a guarantee yet because I don't know for sure, but OMRI means it should be acceptable to use in organic practices, which should mean there's no herbicide in it. But anyway, the setting up a no-dig garden is definitely the biggest tip because you're just going to have I think the more little victories you have starting a garden, the more likely you're going to keep doing it for 5-10 years. And that's what you want. You don't want to just, because I think what a lot of people do is they get all excited in April or May, and they go to a nursery, they spend $100 on plants, and those plants, especially tomato plants, those are going through the roof now. They're like $4, $5 a plant this year. I heard there was some in Billings for $12 per plant. They'll go buy all these plants, and then half of them die, or you just don't get good results. It's not as simple as buying good plants. Yeah. It's a big part of it. Growing good plants is a big part of it, but and so I think a lot of people get excited, and then by July there's just a weed jungle and it doesn't work, Yeah. So we just that no dig thing is the biggest one. Just if you do that alone, and forget about anything else that I have to say, that's going to get you halfway there. I think that eliminates like half the problems that people deal with. But it's not a real sexy topic, It's like buying 6 inches of compost and wood chips. It's not really it's not going to get your views on YouTube. Sure. But it's a game changer though. It's so much easier. And then the second year, I've had my own no dig garden for 3 years now, and the crops are far higher quality than some of the spots on my farm, just because what happens is there's a mycorrhizal fungal network that starts to develop over time, which is, what that is, it's just like life activity underneath the soil surface. Mushrooms start popping up everywhere, and it brings more nutrients to the plants, and they just grow better. Yep. If you go to Scott's farm and you look at his soil that's like 15 years old, it's like better than potting soil. Right. And the same thing happens with this style. The soil gets better over time. And it does on my farm too, but doing that is the easiest way. You don't need to be a Scott or a farmer like me to grow food that way. You could be an absolute beginner and just have success right away. Because the other methods take long. Like the way I'm doing it, I think it takes a good couple years to get really, really good soil. That you get pretty good results right away. And then the other thing is, this is another big thing I'm obsessed with is fall gardening. Okay. The way to grow, this is how my business works. And the way to really make money for me on a third of an acre, which is a tiny amount of land, for growing vegetables. Lots of vegetable farms are way, way bigger than that. Yeah. But to be really efficient and make money on that small plot of land, you need to have 2 to 3 crops a year. So in a greenhouse, we're doing 3 crops a year. If it's tomatoes or cucumbers, we do 2 because those take a lot longer. That's a whole rabbit hole. But at least 2 crops a year, so that's why winter's a big deal. And so as soon as you have your first crop out, you need to replant to something else. I think most Americans don't do that all over the country. Okay. I could be wrong, but I think most people get very excited again in the spring. They plant those plants, and then they kind of forget about it to keep planting in July and August because you're super busy harvesting. You're busy with other stuff in the summer. Sure. But if you keep planting those last 6 weeks of the summer, you double the amount of food, like in the same space, especially with the no dig method. You don't need to do any more bed prep. It's all done. You just, say you planted beets in the spring, your beets are going to be out of the ground in late July, early August. You can throw in spinach or something, and that spinach will grow to maturity by late September or something. And then you can have effectively, you could have like, I don't know, 10 square feet of spinach that will survive. You could be harvesting spinach from late September through right about now. Even in our climate, I have spinach still outside the ground. There's those kinds of little tricks that I don't think the average gardener thinks about too much, because there's just, people forget, because it's in the strategy, the same strategy that makes my farm profitable, especially in this small of a market, is the same strategy that can grow you a truckload of food in a small space, because in a very short growing season too, in Wyoming, we have 120 frost-free days on average. That's the shortest in the U.S. So growing enough to make money in my kind of business means you got to be really efficient with your plant timings and stuff and make sure you get that second crop. But also it means stretching the harvest deep past the frost. You got to use the frost to your advantage here. And if you do that in your garden, your food productivity or harvests really increase. I think most people just harvest their entire garden in September and just stop working, can it or something, and then they just forget about it until May next year. But if you grow cold hardy crops and stretch them deep into the fall, you stagger the amount of work that's required too. You don't have this big weekend of just harvesting your entire garden and canning it. That's a lot of work at one time. But if you stagger that work, and this is the same concept that works on the farm, our farm too, is the work is staggered over 12 months instead of a ton of work in the spring and a ton of work in the fall. If you stagger it over 12 months, it's not really that hard or stressful. You could actually take days off in the summertime. And the same concept works for your garden too, if you think about it like this, and you focus on growing more than just tomatoes. Right. You could still be harvesting in, what are we at, December 5th? You could be harvesting carrots right now easily out of the ground. I've done that many times. And granted, if you live in Canada and you already have a foot of snow, you're probably not going to be doing it. But, in our climate, it's not unusual to get negative 20 next week, in December. Yeah. Oh, yeah, you're new here?
I'm new here, yeah. Oh, don't say those numbers to me. When we woke up the other day and it was 18, I was like, okay.
Yeah,
pass on that, yeah.
Yeah. I'm in Chicago. This is not really that different from me. In fact, I think it's way better than here. Than, Chicago.
That wind, and luckily it's a dry cold, but.
It's dry.
Yes.
Yeah, I hate the humid cold.
But
yeah, I guess the I don't know if I gave you 5 tips or whatever, but
those are really good ones, though. And
stretching the work. Oh, if you zoom out and look at it from a 12-month viewpoint, it becomes a much different picture than I think what the mainstream thought is.
Right.
Just going and buy some nursery plants.
And what I feel like I hear the most is, let's get some raised beds.
Yeah.
Let's get some bags of soil from wherever, and then let's throw some tomatoes in there. You're right. I feel like those are the normal 3 first steps. And so this is a completely different way of thinking. And I think that's a really great point of view.
Yeah.
So.
I have a pretty strong opinion about raised beds. So, I don't think they're like terrible.
Sure.
I'm probably going to have raised beds eventually.
Sure.
But that's another big thing that's another big thing. Everybody wants to do the raised beds.
Right.
And you crunch the numbers on it. Since I run a business, I crunch numbers all the time.
Right.
I'm doing the gardening course in the same way. I'm trying to crunch numbers for people. I think it's going to get a lot more people growing food. You spent $700 on raised beds. So you go buy the cedar. Usually you got to buy really expensive wood. If you're going to do it out of wood, it needs to be very expensive to make sure it doesn't rot. Or treated wood. I mean, it's not cheap. I just looked this up the other day. It's like, on average, people spend $25 to $50 per square foot to build a raised bed. And a lot of people, if they hear that, they're going to be like, "Oh no, I can do it for free." Yes, you can. You can go to you can go get scrap wood and do all sorts of fun stuff. But you're still going to have to spend money eventually to replace all that. And it's not even that long. It's 2 or 3 years. If you're going to just go get free wood, you're going to have to go, or steel. Steel's different. You could get a steel, and that will probably last pretty close to forever. But you still got to build the things. And that's a lot of time. Time is not free. So I don't know exactly how long it would take to build enough raised beds to grow the same amount of food that I talk about in my gardens course, but you got time and money involved with building those things. And the bottom line is, if you did want to buy the materials, or if you buy a pre-made raised bed from a company like Birdie's or something, the ones that are doing the stainless steel ones, I've crunched the numbers on that a lot, and it's, if you spent $700 on steel permanent raised beds from them, you would only be able to grow about 1/6 the amount of food because of the growing space that budget would allow you. You spent $700 on the style I talk about and just grow right in the ground, you increase your growing space by 6 times, roughly. And I'm making generalizations here, but the bottom line is, for that same $700, your growing space dramatically increases when you grow on the ground. That's going to increase your yields. Growing a couple of tomato plants in a raised bed like that, crunch the numbers on what your actual yield is at the end of the year, and I guarantee you it's a truckload less than what I'm talking about with no dig. I guarantee you, especially if you grow the right crops too. Work with your climate, not against it. Like, tomatoes are real hard to grow here. Yep. Really hard. That's why they're so valuable for me to go to a market. It takes thousands of dollars of infrastructure for me to bring thousands of dollars of tomatoes to a market here in our climate, because our nighttime temperatures are so low. In the Midwest, it's a lot easier to grow tomatoes. So yeah, I would definitely, if I was in Illinois, I'd be growing tomatoes for real food. But here, like, very few people can do it well, get a decent amount of food. And the cornerstone of my gardening course and what I talk about in all my YouTube videos is yields. I want to talk about yields of crops, food in the bank, that you're actually feeding yourself. So it's not like you're just having a couple of heirloom tomato plants that are a topic of conversation for you to bring up at a social gathering, but actually putting food on the table for you. That's what I'm trying to teach. And crunch the numbers, growing in the ground is a lot cheaper. It's a lot more profitable. That's the way I think about it in business, but like, actually raised beds in a farm context are they're a lot more expensive to grow in, even on a farm context. You have to maintain those raised beds. There's certain farms that run like that. They have to use a tool called Power Harrow every year. You know what that is? It's sort of a tiller, but it like pushes soil to the side and it forms this raised bed that's like just straight tilled earth. Oh, it's like you've seen Scott's farm. It's kind of like that. Okay. That requires tons of extra work just to maintain that raised bed. It's the same idea with your garden. You have to maintain that raised bed no matter what you get, year after year. So it adds a lot of extra work. My whole thing is just focus on 3 tasks that matter with growing food: planting and harvesting, watering. That's basically it. Shouldn't be focusing much time on weeds or painting all this extra stuff. Planting, harvesting, watering. Right. So that's my opinion on raised beds. And I'll probably have some eventually, because it is, bend down as much as I have. It's nice to not have. If you're a beginner, I would really recommend not doing raised beds. Right. Fair enough. Eventually, if you get really good and you have huge success, go for it. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, those were my biggest questions for you. Cool. Any other major topics that you wanted to address? How long have we been going? Over an hour. An hour and 15. Wow. I know. It goes fast. It does. I don't know if anybody's interested in more me rambling. I have a YouTube channel.
And we will include all of your resources, the course, the YouTube channel, all of the folks that you said were inspiration, all of that stuff in the about section of the episode, so people can reference those as well if they want to check them out.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think
Okay, fantastic. Well, Zach,
fun.
It was fun. And thank you so much for being willing to be a guest. I appreciate it. And thank you for coming to the office. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me. This is my second podcast in my life that I've been a guest.
Thank you so much. And this has been season 2, episode 1 of From the Cowboy State podcast. I'm your host, Michaela Getz, and we had Zach Buchel.
Yes.
Nailed it this time.
Like the belts.
Like the belts. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
As a reminder, this is a University of Wyoming Extension podcast. The university is committed to equal opportunity for all persons in all facets of the university's operations and is an equal opportunity / affirmative action employer. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about this statement, please don't hesitate to reach out to mgetz@uwyo.edu. and we can get your questions answered. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns about the podcast as well, again, don't hesitate to reach out to that email address, mgetz@uwyo.edu. Again, this has been a University of Wyoming Extension Agriculture and Natural Resources podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in.